Dallas is really a special place for Pete. He also really wanted to be here today. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. But we have a short video presentation where he talks about what went into the making of the Nasher and some other thoughts about Dallas. I think Charles mentioned that Pete's been coming to Dallas since the 1950s. I started working with the firm 18 years ago, so a couple of years before the Nasher Sculpture Center opened, and while it was in design. And Nasher was one of the first projects that I worked on and did some of the field work for. So I tagged a lot of the trees that are there, a lot of the shrubs. So I've been coming to Dallas for about 20 years. And I think while maybe in the 50s you had to talk to two people, we understand that in Dallas there are a lot more people and more things that you need to consider today. And work that we're doing today with the Texas Tree Foundation and the Southwest Medical District with Jeanette Munir, who you'll hear from later also, are some of the things that we're doing and some of the aspects where we understand that landscape and broader ideas about landscape, looking at various different influences and goals, are things that need to come into the generation of new places. I think while that's what we're doing today, the Nasher Sculpture Center also looked both to the past and to the future, and much broader than just the site on which it stands. And I think the initial idea of an arts district, a master plan for the arts district, and the conceptual goals and experiential goals of that district are things that were cornerstones in the development and the first thoughts that Pete had with Ray Nasher, with Renzo Piano, and the rest of the Nasher Foundation and family. I think Pete specifically is always interested in looking beyond the confines of a site or one idea, and he's always interested in connecting both to physical things from the past as well as ideas from the past, and hoping that the physical constructions that are the result of the design that we do last far into the future. And I think Nasher has been a fantastic and very special place because of the way that it's matured over the last 15 years or so, and also the way the Arts District has matured in that time. So as we've seen the garden grow, we've also seen the Arts District grow. And I think if you look across the street at Nasher, you can see that the ideas of the garden come through the building out onto the front sidewalk in the street, really connecting the urban streetscape, pedestrian space of the city into the museum and all the way into the garden, connecting people walking and even driving to ideas and sort of the exceptional qualities of art. And so I think that kind of connection is something that we try to do, and something that's been really amazing to be a part of here and went into the first ideas. So I'll let you play the video.
If Kylie's earlier work in Dallas was not the basis of the modern landscape development, both public and private, it certainly set a very high standard. Dan has always been for me the most important American designer of our time. He was important to me because he has always been a mentor and a guide and a goal for our office throughout our 30-plus years of practice. I met Dan when I was a graduate student. He took me with him on field trips, both to the Miller Garden and the Rockefeller Institute, when they were under construction. He also strongly suggested that I go see Sceaux and Villandré in France, which I did with a traveling fellowship after graduating from Harvard. They have been for me, as they were for him, the real potential of landscape architecture. Today I want to show you a few things about the Nasher that you may not know. When we started, it was simply a vacant lot, and the issue that we faced at the very beginning was where the museum and garden should be placed on the site. One idea that was being put forward was that it would run parallel to the Dallas Museum of Art along Harwood Street. The second idea was it might go down at the base of the garden, opposite the freeway, and be partly used to stop the sound. Of course, we didn't know that there would be a park there at that time. My strong preference was that it would face Flora Street, and that was because I was very familiar with the thoughts of Stu Dawson at the Sasaki office that had designed the Arts District. I thought the Arts District was a great idea, which would only work if all the players along the street focused on Flora, so that it became the main pedestrian movement from end to end. When we began, there was just the Dallas Museum and the concert hall, and all these vacant lots and various old buildings in between. But over time, it filled in, and I think that that idea was the correct one. Here you can see the district all filled in, and you can walk from one end to the other and access the many wonderful cultural institutions. The district is one of the most important achievements of the city and is admired worldwide. Here's a picture of the museum and garden along Flora, and you can see that Flora goes across the front of the museum and ends at the fountain court at the Dallas Museum of Art. But our design story really starts out at Ray's house and garden, where the site was over 5 acres. His sculptures were out in the garden in a mature grove of cedar elms that was really quite beautiful. I remember many times in the daytime and also in the evening, before and often during a cocktail party, you could see the sculpture by strolling in the beautiful natural space. So our first design pass was to do a more romantic garden, where the pieces, perhaps there might be 20 or 25 sculptured at any given time, would be placed in this romantic garden, and one would stroll through it and see the pieces in somewhat the same way that you could see them at Ray's house. Renzo, on the other hand, was working on a quite different strategy. He was proposing a series of parallel walls that would lead from Flora into the garden, dividing the museum into a series of spaces and allowing someone walking along Flora to look completely through the museum and see the garden beyond. I think all of us found this a wonderfully compelling idea. So this became the basis of the scheme, and you can see the walls in the model below. So jumping over several years, this is the final plan. In it you can see that the garden is conceived as a series of hedges and rows of oak trees, which extend Renzo's idea of the walls out into the garden. A series of cedar elms, bosques, further divide the garden into a variety of different sized rooms. Andrea Nasher's dealer, Doug Christmas from Ace Gallery, had told me that the sculptors would like a simple grid of trees to play against. We finally produced a more complex grid, and the sculptors have indeed liked it. The next thing I wanted to mention to you is something you may not know. Underneath the garden surface of lawn, there is a 6-foot deep slab of porous soil that runs the whole length of the garden. The reason for this is that we wanted the garden to be essentially flat, with no catch basins and no internal grading. The water goes down through the soil and is drained away 6 feet below the surface. The sculptures could then sit on a really flat surface. You can see here all the stuff that runs through this 6-foot layer of soil, all the electrical, sound, drainage, and irrigation. Everything runs inside the 6-foot layer. This cost a lot of money, but Ray thought it was a good idea and was willing to pay the extra to do it. He called it designer dirt, which may not have been all complimentary. The idea of utilizing soil had started at a project we did in Sydney, Australia, at the Olympic Park, which was a reclamation site. We were working very closely with a soil scientist, and he taught us a lot of things that soil could do, not only promoting plant growth, but also other things like drainage and erosion control through percolation. From the Nasher, these ideas went directly to the National September 11th Memorial, and they are essentially the same system being used in New York City. The other thing that happened with this soil was that when the trees first went in, they were relatively small, as you can see on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can see that in the first 10 years, they grew much faster, maybe twice as fast as one would normally expect. Of course, landscape architects love the idea that the trees grow faster, but it posed some problems with much more trimming and shaping earlier in the life of the center. The trees, of course, play a major role in forming the garden, and therefore occur much earlier in time than normal. Here's a picture from the bottom of the garden, looking through the oak alley on the right-hand side, and the cedar elm boss forming rooms for the sculpture placement. And you can also see the hedges that form extensions of Renzo's walls. This is also at the foot of the garden by the Terrell Sculpture Room, and a long earth berm to protect from the sound of the freeway. The garden was intended for varying numbers of people coming in and seeing the sculpture, much as an indoor museum would function for large and small groups. It also served individuals who could find the quiet time alone to see the sculptures. Not everybody relates to the sculpture in exactly the same way. For some, it is used as a playground, especially for the kids that would come with their parents. We have always thought this was a good thing. As in all gardens, we deal with the seasons. We are very conscious that one of the characteristics of a garden is the changes going through the seasons. This would change how the sculptures could be seen in different environments depending on the time of year. One of the first things that happened is that people liked the garden for more than just seeing sculpture. And there were a series of uses, partly sponsored by the museum, but also generated by the broader community. It has become one of the most popular outdoor places in Dallas to hold various kinds of celebrations, like weddings, corporate parties, and bar mitzvahs. However, this may have been almost too much of a good thing. The number of requests have grown every year, and the variety of ways it is used and the number of people have continued to increase. This has become a problem because the garden was designed for the quiet viewing, with a few people going in, and now these have become hundreds of people. This makes the maintenance more difficult, especially the lawn. The irony is that the lawn and the gardens is why they come to the space. The center has continued to do the increased maintenance and reseeding. And here is the garden today. Here you see on the left Ray and his family cutting the ribbon, and on the right Ray welcoming everybody to the museum for the first time. Ray is clearly a very happy man. It has always been a great honor to have been part of this wonderful enterprise, and I am very grateful to Ray and his family. Thank you.